on the wall, sit there. Get up on the wall, sit there. Get some horsepower.
Joe Biden sanarwar da mai magana da yan fadar White House Jan Psaki ya yi a yi Asabar shugaban na Isra'ila da wa'adinsa ke kawo ƙarshe ranar 5 ga watan Yuli ta Mayu ranar 5 ga watan Yuli na wannan shekara ya amsa goron gayyatar shugaban Amurka ne.
Lui, pour éviter le retour de l'ancienne garde. En l'absence de sondage fiable, l'issue du scrutin s'annonce incertaine après une campagne particulièrement tendue. Le président Armen Sarkissian a dénoncé récemment le flot de haine qui s'est déversé.
Hey, we're gonna ask them if we use their truck. Look, they just backed all the way. Look, they backed up all the way to the fence. They just used their truck to chill.
Yola don samar da zaman lafiya a Zaria da ke Kaduna mai magana wanda ya wakil.
L'interruption de la première chaîne était déjà en place. Nous avons bénéficié d'innovations comme la vaccination et aussi le traitement de nouvelles molécules qui ont permis aussi d'atténuer l'impact et de circonscrire cette résurgence dans ce foyer initial. À vrai dire, la région de Zérékoré a été la seule réellement impactée, même s'il y a eu des alertes dues à la mobilité à Conakry, vers la frontière du Mali. Ces alertes n'ont pas conduit à l'implantation de nouveaux foyers.
Georges Alfred Kibo, représentant de l'OMS en Guinée. Au Malawi, la vaccination contre le Covid-19 connaît des difficultés au moment où de nombreux arrivent en masse aux urnes en 2020.
Et c'est d'ailleurs bien le pari de Marine Le Pen, remporter une ou plusieurs régions pour encore élargir son électorat en vue de la présidentielle.
Et on devrait avoir les premières tendances à l'issue de la fermeture des derniers bureaux de vote dans les grandes villes à 20h heure de Paris. Ce soir suivi notre édition. Jusqu'à présent, les sorties étaient interdites au-delà de 23h et jusqu'à 6h du matin. Une restriction imposée il y a 8 mois afin de limiter la propagation du coronavirus. Mais la situation sanitaire sort nettement et le gouvernement a décidé de lever le couvre-feu dès aujourd'hui avec du jour d'avance.
Bueno, no tengo un nombre, pero diferentes culturas comienzan sus días en diferentes tiempos. Los egipcios antiguos comenzaban su día a la puesta del sol.
Tiene sentido. Eran veneradores del sol.
Ambos, Babilonia y Grecia, comenzaban su día a la puesta del sol.
Es raro. Contradice a la intuición. Comenzar el día a la puesta del sol.
Los días en nuestro calendario moderno comienzan a medianoche, porque eso era lo que hacían los romanos. Muchos hoy saben que los judíos comienzan su sabbat al atardecer del viernes.
Así es. Guardan el sabbat desde el atardecer del viernes hasta el atardecer del sábado.
Y desafortunadamente, muchos protestantes que veneran los sábados también comienzan el sabbat al atardecer por ninguna otra razón cuando lo hacen los judíos.
Es cuando veneran los judíos.
Lo que muchos no saben es que la práctica de los judíos en realidad comenzó cuando los judíos estaban en la apostasía.
Qué irónico. Una de las prácticas principales que separa a los judíos como
front and side, and you can complain about that. There's some things you can't change. I got a letter from somebody the other day, or it was an article I think was written. It said there used to be two things you don't talk about, religion and taxes, and now there's three. Religion, taxes, and Mother Angelica.
System. We were amazed and we lived the lifestyle out of people. And so, of course, we took on identity of being Maori. But I always acknowledge the dual heritage of both my mother and my father.
So when cops show up, they were all fleeing. Just like always. Right? Just like right?
Say it one more time after grab.
Let's go.
Well, I'm not hearing Archie now. I don't know what happened. K3PYT and K4T is still there, Archie.
Oh no, oh no.
Worship in the golden calf. Now, his original dream comes true, if you'll open your Bibles with me, to Genesis chapter 42, beginning verse 13. We'd like to encourage our radio audience to go to our website at www.churchofchristpreaching.com. There's 1,000 sermons on there. There's all kinds of written lessons. There's all...
Cheese and mayor steak or grilled cheese and some chili. And goat cheese. Goat cheese. Hey, throw you some bacon on that grilled cheese. What you got? I had to drop a deuce. On Obama? He went and dropped an Obama. He dropped the deuce. How many times did you have to flush? Well, let me tell you, it was so high I couldn't see any water. Well. Yeah. Rack off looked like a douche on a Saturday night. Blinded by the light. Go ahead. Wrapped up like a douche. We have one every night. Jimmy wouldn't even say hello to my Aunt Sarah this morning. Really? Too early in the morning. Too early. He wanted to wash her back. Too early in the morning. I'm waiting for Steve. That Jimmy wanted to wash her back and scrub out her toes. Waiting for Steve. Wouldn't even say hello before we get out.
Waiting for Steve. Steel drill. Yeah. Oh boy. Carrie didn't give up yet. You tired, dog? I am. What's going on out here? That is hot. Yeah. Good morning. Yeah, something like that. Good morning. The idiot out here in control of the carrier. Who knows? He just one of them little pits full of carriers in it like a sawed-off maggot. It really doesn't matter.
Can't see. What do you mean? That's not a fuzz.
HU, Canada. Coordinated Universal Time. Hours. 14 minutes. 6 heures, 14 minutes.
That's that trait of Esau, that pharisaical trait. Can't forgive. Bitterness. But is in danger of eternal damnation.
More. When you lose something, you appreciate it more. And, it's definitely
Están los cristianos que me hablaban de Dios, odiaba a todos.
Jim Legler. Now this series met. Got guys to the rim as well. Now, the one.
Greg Fraley is a paid testimonialist and real Prevagen user. Based on the were many of les sports. Et revoilà Christophe Diremzian. On commence par du foot. Christophe, les favoris étaient à la peine hier à juste avant la pause sur un but d'Attila. Catastrophe, pas dissipée par un trio d'attaque qui devrait en vomissant. À l'image d'un Karim Benzema qui n'a toujours pas trouvé le chemin des filets, mais le sélectionneur Didier
What makes AA work? In most cases, they give you hope. You can do it.
Con lunisolar, los decimocuartos de cada mes siempre caen en el sexto día de la semana y los decimoquintos son siempre el sabbat del séptimo día.
Sí, porque el ciclo semanal reinicia cada mes.
Entonces juntemos la evidencia. Deuteronomio 16, versículo 1 dice que los israelitas salieron de noche. Sabemos que esta noche no pudo ser la Pascua, como muchos han asumido, porque en Éxodo 12, versículo 22, dice que nadie saliera de sus casas hasta la mañana. Esto se confirma en Números 33, versículo 3, cual da la fecha en que salieron de Egipto, el día 15 del primer mes.
Entonces, estás diciendo que el día de la Pascua, cual sabemos que siempre es los 14 y siempre el sexto día de la semana, comenzando el alba y no terminaba hasta el alba del día siguiente, el día 15.
Correcto.
Pero aún cuando podían dejar sus casas al alba, no se fueron. ¿Por qué no se fueron de una vez? Dices que anduvieron por ahí hasta esa noche.
Sí, recuerden que en el calendario lunisolar, el día 15 siempre es un sabbat. Yahuwah no quebrantaría su propio sabbat, el descanso del cuarto mandamiento, diciéndoles que salgan de Egipto durante las horas sagradas del día. Es por eso que los guió fuera de Egipto cuando las horas sagradas del sabbat terminaron esa noche.
Bien, pueden ver esto, pero nos lleva a otras preguntas. Tomaremos un breve pausa y ya volvemos.
Claro, mientras tanto los dejamos con nuestra compañera Laura Martínez.
Creen que el sábado es el séptimo día del Sabbat de las Escrituras por ninguna otra razón, puesto que es cuando los judíos veneran. El problema es que esto no prueba nada, decir que los judíos veneran los sábados, así que el sábado es el Sabbat porque es cuando ellos veneran. Es un ejemplo excelente del razonamiento rogante. La sorprendente verdad es que los mismos eruditos judíos reconocen que el sábado no es el original sábado de la antigüedad de las Escrituras. Visite nuestra página web en www.slacance.com/español. Busque por el artículo o vídeo Los judíos del Sabbat, el encubrimiento olvidado. Ahora pueden ver los vídeos solamente en nuestra página web. Haga clic en la bandera de su idioma.
Amigos, continuamos con el diálogo de hoy. Creo que las Escrituras lo dejan claro. La Pascua siempre cae los 14 de abril, el primer mes. Los israelitas debían de quedarse en casa hasta la mañana. ¿Y qué hicieron entonces? ¿Anduvieron por ahí hasta que llegara la noche? ¿Qué estaba sucediendo durante esas horas?
Mantenían el Sabbat santo, pero más que eso, los egipcios venían a ellos, dándoles regalos y presionando a que se vayan. Veamos Éxodo 12, leamos los versículos 30 al 36.
Y se levantó Faraón en la noche, y él con todos sus siervos y todos los egipcios, y hubo un gran clamor en Egipto. No había hogar donde no hubiera alguien muerto. Entonces llamó a Moisés y a Aarón aún de noche y dijo: levantaos y
Peter did. Our Lord didn't even reprove him. He said, "Do you love me?" 3 times.
God began to rise, and as he did, his head and hands went into the cloud, into a higher place. He rose to his feet. As he rose to his feet, he seemed to have cleansed himself.
Be careful when you're baking. Be careful when you're baking. Don't let the bacon get burned. How many hours should I say? I am 101. It's very noticeable because if you have more power, put all your power and come to talk to us. I'm really stupid. I'm trying to read the book. I have it. I don't know how to use it. The thing is, the ranging is different. You probably want the ranging such that you could do a compromise, but you can adjust the one for a smaller number and the other for a bigger number, depending on the sideband. I could put a toggle in, and I couldn't make it where it knows. See, that gets into more complicated, but I could make it where the software knows, keeps track of the status of which sideband you're on, upper and lower, and automatically change the range. Or you could waste controls. You could have a low cut and a high cut for both upper and lower sideband and have to use 4 rotaries. You could do it that way, or just do a compromise on the ranging.
Well, I just want to see if I had it. One of the things I saw was that, whereas you can do ZZTL 0100, which is give you 100 hertz low cut on your transmit bandwidth, I don't know that there's any way to use a rotary controller to change the value. In other words, I see the cat command where you can put in a specific value, but how can you use a controller to have a continuously variable value put in there?
Well, if you're looking at the document and you see the P1, that's the data that's sent to, you send that. Like if you just put ZZTL in there, it's going to spit back a response with what your actual setting is. Now, if you send it with ZZTL and like 0150, that would be 150 hertz. And it would, you can make the rotary control where it steps through. You translate the 0 to 127 to negative whatever to positive whatever you want. To receive. I'm not seeing any negative numbers here. So this is probably more like you would expect. So this is probably not going to have the problem with the single sideband issue like the receive. So the low cut is the low cut for both lower and upper sideband. High is the high frequency. But on the receive side, you kind of need to use up 4 controls. On the transmit, you would only need to use 2.
Okay, fine. So if I understand you correctly, your program will enable us to do, for instance, ZZTL effectively for the low transmit filter setting, and use a rotary control to translate the position of the
Le prix du coq d'or. Ceci est le résultat de ce concept artistique. Penser à contre-courant et être persévérant. Arrivé au district de Jashan
auch zum führenden Herstellungszentrum für Streichinstrumente im Land machen wird. 新疆的特色美食。
Probablemente la canción que estamos escuchando se inspiró en una historia de amor contada por un soldado a quien la entrevistó.
太阳能帆板展开正常，我们等一下口令。
Von ihnen begannen ihre Arbeit in Geigenbauateliers und machten positive Erfahrungen.
Durch eine Frau ins Haus mit seinem Brief angeführt wurden.
Er sagt, dass die Arbeit als Geigenbauer ihm ein Gefühl der Erfüllung gibt. Es macht
天路1号0自行跟踪正常，前反向数据收发正常。
3名航天员都在拿着操作手册，因为这会儿他们也有一些跟地面配合的工作。
对，要检查这个座舱里面的环境。还有一些相关的设备的参数是不是正常的？
神舟12号，我是北京。通报座舱环境及身体状况。
That does little to secure any appeal beyond their base of support.
Okay, well, thank you for that. That was Richard Garagosian, Director of Regional Studies Center think tank in Yerevan. You're listening to Weekend on the BBC World Service. This is the BBC World Service, where we're always asking the big questions. Exercise more, eat less, you'll probably end up losing some weight. And to check, a quick step on the scales. But how would you weigh something bigger? Much, much bigger. Well, I've put the scales on the ground. What I really need to do is put them the other way up. On the next episode of Crowd Science, we find out if the Earth is getting heavier or lighter.
I think what a lot of people don't recognize is how big our atmosphere actually is. Every single year, the Earth captures about 10,000 tons of dust.
Join me, Marnie Chesterton, as we try and weigh the world. Does my equator look big in this? Crowd Science, Monday at 8:30 GMT. It's 6:30 GMT. This is Weekend from the BBC World Service. Still to come, China's grand Belt and Road investment deal hits a bump in Italy as the Italian authorities announce the agreement signed just 2 years ago is up for review. And the head of the UN's Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs speaks to us in his last day on the job. We'll hear his reflections on what's happening in Ethiopia, Yemen, and other conflict zones.
BBC News with Neil Nunes. 6 world powers and Iran are preparing for meetings in Vienna to discuss how to restore the internet nuclear deal. The United States, which pulled out of the agreement when Donald Trump was in office, has said it's willing to continue the talks after the election of the hardline cleric Ibrahim Raisi as Iranian president. People in Armenia are voting in a snap parliamentary election to resolve the political crisis caused by last year's disastrous war with Azerbaijan. Armenia lost significant territory and about 4,000 soldiers in the 6-week conflict over the region of Nagorno-Karabakh. Polling stations have opened in France for elections in 17 regions and about 100 departments. They had been delayed because of the pandemic. The regional elections are being closely watched because it's less than a year until the next presidential poll. Taiwan is due to receive 2.5 million doses of coronavirus vaccine today, donated by the United States. Taiwan has accused China of interfering in its efforts to acquire vaccines from Western manufacturers. The athletes' village for the Tokyo Olympics has been unveiled to the media. The village on the Tokyo waterfront will house 18,000 athletes and officials. The residents will have daily COVID testing. Reports from southern Poland say about 20 families have been made homeless by a fire that swept through part of the village of Nowobiała. Local media say several hundred firefighters battled to bring the fire under control. The final round of group matches begins today in the Euro 2020 Football Championships, with most of the qualification places yet to be decided. Only 3 countries, Italy, Belgium and the Netherlands, are already mathematically certain to go through to the last 16. BBC World News.
A very warm welcome back. You're listening to Weekend from the BBC World Service. I'm Celia Hatton. Well, we have 2 guests with us who are sharing their thoughts on the news and the issues making headlines at the moment. Well, today they are Viola von Kramon. She's a German member of the European Parliament for the Greens, and she's also a rapporteur to the Parliament on Belarus. She joins us from Emden in the northwest of Germany. And Ivan Krastev, he's a Bulgarian political scientist. He's chairman of the Center for Liberal Strategies in Sofia, and he's also a permanent fellow at the Institute for Human Science in Vienna. We're going to be hearing more from them in just a few moments' time. But first, China's President Xi Jinping has made the country's bold Belt and Road Initiative one of his signature policies. It's a far-reaching campaign to establish new global trading routes, in part to help sell Chinese goods. But China's ruling Communist Party says such routes can also be used to open new markets to eager Chinese consumers. It's a win-win, Beijing argues. It's invested billions through Chinese state companies to build infrastructure projects in support of that vision. Well, from the start, critics said the campaign wasn't just about economics. They say it was a bold bid by Xi Jinping to extend China's geopolitical strategy too. Then, last week, a new U.S.-led plan to challenge China's bold vision. The G7 group of the world's most developed nations, meeting here in the UK, presented a united front to counter the Belt and Road Initiative. Here is the Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi explaining what had been agreed.
Non è una strada particolarmente dura verso la Cina.
It's not that we're particularly harsh with China. We need to cooperate. We'll have to work with China within the G20 on climate change, and also with regards to the reconstruction of the world after the pandemic. But we will do so in a very frank way. In other words, saying what is not quite right according to us, and what is not corresponding with our vision of the world.
Well, Italy plays a key role in all of this. In March 2019, it became the first major Western power and the first G7 country to officially join China's Belt and Road Initiative, signing a Memorandum of Understanding, an MOU, with the Chinese authorities. President Xi Jinping even traveled to Rome to put his signature to a total of 29 deals amounting to $2.8 billion. So, it was not entirely unexpected that at the same press conference a week ago, the Italian Prime Minister faced several questions relating to Italy's deal with Beijing.
O in qualche modo resterà congelato? Come che verrà congelato? Che sia di fatto congelato?
Here, he was asked by a reporter whether the deal was now frozen, and he responded,
Per quanto riguarda l'atto specifico lo esamineremo con attenzione.
A very short statement. His words, regarding that specific agreement, we will assess it carefully. Well, China has denounced the G7's moves to work together. The Chinese embassy in London said the days when global decisions were dictated by a small group of countries are long gone. Well, let's cross now to Rome and speak to Alessandro Speciale, Bloomberg's bureau chief there. Alessandro, has Italy carried out a U-turn on its China interpreted that way by some observers?
Good morning. Yes, there was a very clear U-turn. Draghi, as soon as he took office earlier this year, he tried to send a clear message. He stopped the purchase of an Italian small company from a Chinese company, and then he leaned in to convince the Agnelli family to stop the sale of the Iveco truck business to another Chinese company. There was a very clear signal: no deals with China until we clarify our position.
Alessandro, stay with us just for a moment. I just want to say that we should note we requested an interview with the Italian Prime Minister. His spokesperson told us that Mr. Draghi has nothing to add to what he said about the China deal last Sunday, and he's giving no interviews. Our request for an interview with the Italian Minister of Finance was also rejected. But Alessandro, I'm hoping you can listen to this following point. I did speak to the man behind that 2019 China deal, Italy's former Undersecretary of State for Economic Development, Michel Giracci. What did he make of the Prime Minister's statement?
I understand what he meant is now I have a little bit more time and I can look at this famous MOU. So nothing about Italy withdrawing or any of the reading that we have heard over the last few days. Also because it is impossible to change or withdraw from it, neither would it be a good idea or useful for the Italian economy.
So still, though, the MOU is apparently under review. If Italy cannot change or withdraw from it, then what's this review referring to?
The review can refer to how to make the best use of it and understand better how we want to engage with China from an economic and investment point of view, which is what the MOU is about.
Critics say that this agreement with Beijing, signed in 2019, really hasn't amounted to much. There's a sense that whatever has been achieved in terms of Italy-China economic cooperation over the past couple of years is all linked to agreements that were reached before that deal was signed.
This is true, and the reason why not much has happened, I pin it down to a number of reasons. One, after we signed the MOU in March 19, the Conte One government, of which I was part, went out, and I went out. And so people who replaced me did not have so much interest in carrying out the work that we had started. Then, 3 months later, we had the pandemic. So, willing or not, the focus could have not been on what to do with the MOU, but was on saving lives and saving the economy. And also, if I may, you mentioned critics. Who were really those critics? The critics of the MOU were mostly foreign observers, economists, members of European governments, even of the European Union, and even our friends in the United States. But no Italian company criticized this MOU. We don't do things to get a pat on the shoulder from our foreign.
There were a lot of people at the time inside Italy and outside, citizens who questioned the wisdom of signing this kind of deal with Beijing after citing China's human rights record. There were serious concerns about China's using detention camps in Xinjiang, and since then, we've also seen China's increasing crackdown in the territory of Hong Kong. Why this continuing appetite to do business with China?
The appetite that we have is because we have a duty to companies that want to export. All ethical issues that you mentioned are indeed very, very important, but I tend not to take decisions whose price is paid by someone else. I do trade. The Minister of Foreign Affairs deals with ethical issues, and this MOU was pushed by me for the commercial side.
But sir, shouldn't trade also be concerned with ethical issues? Shouldn't business people in Italy also be concerned about what's going on in Hong Kong, what's going on in Xinjiang, in a place where there are 1 million people in detention camps?
That is not entirely true, because I just came back from Xinjiang. I do not believe there is any signs of genocide in Xinjiang. If we do not want to do business with China because we are worried about the ethical issue, I think there will be with whom probably we should not do business with.
You say that you were just in Xinjiang. Of course, there are numerous witnesses, hundreds of witnesses, satellite imagery, and also leaked government documents to indicate a serious problem with detention camps there. Whether you want to call it genocide or not is another debate. I wonder, do you sense that members of the Italian government are looking at these issues when they review the deal with Beijing?
Indeed, yes, they are looking at this. This is an issue that we need to ask, but we do not have members of parliament who give the answer.
Can we refocus on this the review of this deal? Do you think that this has been announced due to pressure from the United States?
The Biden administration does indeed put pressure. They have put pressure on us. At the time was the Trump administration. At the end of the day, this MOU tries to do the same things that our American friends want to do, which is do more business with China. The United States do business at the tune of 100 to 100 billion per year. Italy, only a few tens of billions. So Italy lags behind.
Italy's former Undersecretary of State for Economic Development, Michele Gerassi. Well, Alessandra Speciale, let's turn back to you. Mr. Gerassi says it's all about trade. He seems quite dismissive of any critics of the deal that Italy signs with China. But are Italians having an internal debate about which countries they want to trade with?
Well, not exactly, I would say, but definitely the Draghi government had a long, hard thought about this. As Mr. Gerassi was saying, the memorandum per se didn't bring much investment to Italy for now, for some reasons. It was kind of put in a drawer and stayed there. But it sent an ambiguous signal about Italy's international alignment. Italy's role had always been with the European Union and with the United States, what it is called an Atlanticist stance, and Draghi's actions since he came to office were designed to reassure international partners that this is very much where Italy still is now, because there had been this MOU with China, there had been Salvini's flirtation with Putin. When Draghi came in, said, no longer. Italy is with the EU and with the US.
So what can we expect in the coming weeks and months ahead for Italy's relationship with China? With this G7 stance, is Italy really prioritizing US ties over this China deal?
Absolutely. As we have seen, Draghi is very ready to block takeover offers from China. And of course, Italy, as all G7 countries, will continue to engage with China, for example, on climate. But the overall strategic stance is going to be one more of competition rather than one of trying to be in a middle position between the West and China.
Alessandro Speciale, thank you very much. Alessandro is Bloomberg's bureau chief in Rome. Viola von Krammen, let's hear your thoughts on this. Is it difficult to continually prioritize human rights when the global economy has been paralyzed by the pandemic? Can we understand the difficulties that the Italian government is facing here?
Well, I think these are different layers of the story. So first of all, I'm happy that Draghi decided to stand within the European community, within the partners in the West, and with the US. I think the new initiative of the G7 was overdue. I wish they would have started with that a bit earlier, because that says we need, in general, an infrastructure offer for each and everyone. And so while the Chinese have started with this 8 years ago, of course they are much more advanced and strategically outspoken, and we're approaching different partners. But what we have seen, for example, with the harbor, the port of Piraeus in Greece, that with Greece and the European Council silencing and vetoing all kinds of critical resolutions on China. So, of course, we were very much concerned that if the Italian government is part of the, let's say, Chinese influence within the European Union, that could happen to Italy too. So that is, I think, a remarkable step by Draghi, finally deciding not to join this club, or not explicitly joining this club. The next thing is, of course, we have to build more critical or more resilience of how we can counter the Chinese influence when it comes to critical infrastructure, when it comes to critical companies in the EU. I think some steps have been made, but maybe not enough. Second point I just want to make is the Western Balkans. We see an increasing influence, especially in Serbia, Montenegro, other states, where then, when the debts cannot be repaid by the countries, China has a grip on the territory of those countries, and this is a really critical phase we should speak about.
Ivan Krastev, I'd like to revive a discussion that we had on the program yesterday. What do you think? Are we looking at the prospect of a new Cold War here, China facing down a Western alliance of countries?
Yeah, I do believe that they're going to be a much more confrontation and competition. And from this point of view, the Biden's visit to Europe was with a very simple message. The business with China is not only business. It's very much competition of political systems. It is kind of a competition for strategic hegemony, and every country should decide where they stand. On the other side, it's not the Cold War as we remember it. China is not the Soviet Union. In a certain way, it's much more stronger in economic terms, but what is much more important, China is not trying to transform every single country to look like China. What China is interested in is simply countries to do what China wants. And from this point of view, this is going to be much more exhausting. I do believe that there are going to be a major spheres in which we see a major decoupling between the West and China, particularly technological sphere. So when the undersecretary, the former Italian undersecretary, is saying our companies want this, our companies want that, and probably he's right, companies want to make profits anywhere they can do it. The problem is that the game has changed. The relations with China is going to be very much perceived as in security terms, and this is a major change. So any type of things that work business for the companies can be seen in a very different way from the governments, but also societies. And from this point of view, Draghi is in a strong position, because if you see the latest European Council of Foreign Relations polls, Italy is one of the most pro-American places in Europe. So from this point of view, while the business can be very much interested and eager to do business with China, you can see that society is sharing some of the security concerns of the political elites.
Ivan, thank you. It is 48 minutes past the hour. You're listening to Weekend, and this is the BBC World Service. Back in 2011, the Harvard intellectual Steven Pinker made a splash when he argued that we are now living in the most peaceful era in human history. But did he speak too soon? Since then, violence and conflicts have surged in Syria, Yemen, the Horn of Africa, Myanmar, just to name a few. The UN's Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, or OCHA, is responsible for organizing the humanitarian response to emergencies, not just conflicts, but also climate change or pandemics. The person in charge of OCHA since 2017 has been the British economist Sir Mark Lowcock, who has just left the post. He spoke to us on Friday, his last day in the job, having warned the world a few days earlier of famine in the Ethiopian region of Tigray, devastated by months of fighting between government forces and rebels. He told me first of what he hopes to see next.
Three things need to happen if we're going to avoid a total tragedy. Firstly, there needs to be a lot more access for aid operations and aid workers to reach the needy, millions of people needing assistance, so the military people need to allow the access on all sides. Secondly, the aid agencies do need to scale up their operations. They need a lot more capacity because of the scale of the problem. And thirdly, we need a lot more money.
And where are you hoping more money is going to be coming from?
The G7, in its communique last weekend, made a commitment to address the financing issue. The Americans, I must say, have stepped up in a very generous way so far. The UK made some announcements to increase their financing, not to the level they provided last year yet, but certainly a lot more than they had been providing hitherto. I hope that other European countries will step up as well.
In your mention of a solution, a possible solution, you really focused on aid and access to aid, but what about a decrease in the conflict? Ethiopia's UN ambassador has said that Eritrean troops who've been fighting in the region will definitely leave soon. What's your reaction to this? Will that help?
Well, I think that would be very good. Of course, it's been promised now for quite a long time. What matters is whether it happens or not. The head of the Ethiopian military told the UN earlier this week that they were now moving from what they had been calling a law and order operation to a humanitarian response operation. So we would like to see that proved to be true in practice as well, and we would like to see a dramatic reduction in the hundreds of incidents we've had of aid workers being blocked from doing their jobs or assaulted or beaten or interrogated, or in, I'm afraid, 10 cases now, being killed.
Let's focus on another humanitarian disaster in Yemen, where you've been dealing with the situation in Yemen for the whole of your tenure. You wrote on social media this week that the same severe issues have remained in place for the past 4 years. How do you feel on leaving your post that more action hasn't been taken to bring peace to the country? Is it frustrating?
What's happened over the last 4 years while I've been doing this job is that the causes of crises, whether it's Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan, the Sahel, lots of other places, have been compounded by the combination of conflict and climate change and now COVID. And what the world has responded to is the symptoms, the humanitarian need, the displacement and so on. And for as long as all that happens is you deal with the symptoms, you shouldn't expect the problem to get better or go away. So the world needs to get better at dealing with causes. Now, what's happened in Yemen is the conflict has not been brought under control. There hasn't been a ceasefire. And that's why pretty much every year I've had to warn of the next danger of a famine outbreak and bring in a lot more money and implore the parties not to sacrifice millions of women and children and innocent men on the altar of their political argument. Until the causes get dealt with, we will be dealing just with the symptoms and suffering will grow.
You thought that Ethiopia was a man-made tragedy. Is that really the problem here? That aid in these cases is just a band-aid solution to these tragedies that are quite complex and are engineered by humans?
Yeah, I mean, most of the problems that we deal with in humanitarian agencies have a human origin. Conflict, obviously, is a man-made. Climate change is substantially man-made as well, and the world is too slow to both mitigate the rate of climate change and help the most vulnerable countries adapt to it. There's a huge moment coming up later this year in Glasgow at the Conference of the Parties to try to get a grip of that. Disease outbreaks, obviously, like COVID, are a natural phenomenon, but it matters a lot how well you respond to them, and the help given to the most vulnerable countries through the pandemic has been woefully inadequate, both in terms of support for their economies and in giving them a fair share of things like the vaccines. And that is not a smart strategy by the richer countries, because until these problems are dealt with everywhere, no one will be safe from them.
There are more conflicts now globally than there were 20 years ago. What do you put that down to? And did that ever make you feel in this job that you were trying to achieve the impossible?
Aid agencies, and it's been my job to coordinate them in the humanitarian response for the last 4 years, basically do a pretty good job in avoiding the worst. You know, every year we reach 100 million people. We certainly save millions and millions of lives. The thing that is a little bit frustrating for the humanitarian agencies is while we can save life and buy time, the world is not doing very well in using that time to find solutions to problems. And that's the thing that really needs to change. And the growth of conflict, particularly in the last 10 years, needs to be addressed in a much more serious way through collaboration by the leading powers, which has been woefully lacking.
Sir Mark Lowcock. Ivan Kratsev, what are your reflections on the prospects for global cooperation in light of the pandemic? Have we learned any lessons, or was the botched vaccine rollout, for example, a real missed opportunity?
Listen, the story is that different governments have learned different lessons. And what makes me slightly pessimistic is the fact that if we had this conversation 2 years ago, and we can talk what kind of a crisis can give an incentive to governments to cooperate much more with each other. Probably we'll agree that pandemics like the one we experienced, that continue to experience these days, is the one that should make governments to cooperate with each other. We should be all aware of the fact that until every person everywhere is vaccinated, basically there is a risk for many other societies. It can happen. In a certain way, particularly the initial part of the pandemic was a zero-level cooperation. Many governments in the world basically just focus on their own population. The idea was we're doing what we can do for our own people and let's not be interested for others. And from this point of view, this is showing a certain kind of a major problem. We are talking about common global problems, but the fact that the problems are common does not mean automatically that we respond in a cooperative way. And what we learned, in my view, from the pandemic is that even when it comes to climate change, even when it comes to issues where as if everybody is concerned, we should understand that the level of political polarization, the geostrategic interest of the countries are playing very, very important role.
Viola von Kramon, we heard Sir Mark Lowcock speak just now about the latest situation in Ethiopia. What do you think? Should the EU be doing more to deal with the situation in Tigray? What can be done?
Well, I mean, in general, I mean, there is obviously a cynicism in many of the states where famine and starvation is obviously used as an instrument in this civil war situation, and Ethiopia is an unfortunate example for this. The EU is actually and they have suspended different tranches of money. They have laid out or rolled out a package for humanitarian aid and so on and so forth. But as long as Ivan has mentioned, there is a cooperation on a geopolitical level with external actors and local decision makers who share this cynicism and who have not this cooperative approach. It is very difficult for us from the civil, let's say, crisis prevention management to succeed in those places. And that makes it very difficult, as well as was in Syria the case.
All right, Viola, we'll have to leave that there. But do stay with us. You're listening to Weekend on the BBC World Service. This is the BBC World Service. Recent me looking into how the course of the Cold War was dramatically changed.
In 1971, Henry Kissinger embarked on a secret trip to China.
It's more than just a turning point in the Cold War. I think it's a turning point in 20th and 21st century history.
How did our secret mission come about, and what's its legacy?
When Kissinger went to China at bbcworldservice.com/documentaries. And in 30 minutes,
following the death of Kenneth Kaunda, the first president of Zambia, we look back at his life and legacy. He was instrumental in the fight against apartheid, gaining a peaceful transition to power in his own country, where he was in power for 27 years.
Now it's back to Weekend. This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station. BBC World Service, it's 7 hours GMT. This is Weekend. I'm Celia Hatton. Will the election of a hardline cleric as Iran's president have an impact on nuclear negotiations with the West?
Mr. Khamenei, in spite of his rhetoric against the West, has recognized that unless they make a deal with the West, the end of the regime might well be on the horizon.
France votes in regional elections today. It's seen as a test for President Macron before next year's presidential poll. And weddings are back on here in England, but dancing and singing remain prohibited. But is a wedding without a dance floor? With me are my two guests, Viola von Kramon, a member of the European Parliament, and Ivan Krastev, a Bulgarian political scientist. That's here on Weekend.
I'm Neil Nunes with BBC News. The world powers negotiating a revival of the nuclear deal with Iran will meet in Vienna today to discuss the way forward. The United States has said it's willing to continue the talks after the election of the hardline cleric Ibrahim Raisi as Iranian president. Ian Skippers has this report.
Talks about reinstating the deal about Iran's nuclear program have been going on since April. The US wants to rejoin the pact, abandoned under President Trump, but that was never going to be easy. Key differences remain, and at this moment, the Iranians do not want to include American officials in face-to-face meetings. The election of a new Iranian president has also created new realities, but Mr. Raisi has in the past expressed support for the deal, under which Iran accepted curbs on its nuclear program in exchange for lifting of sanctions. Since the US pulled out of the deal, Iran has rebuilt its stockpiles of enriched uranium.
People in Armenia are voting in a snap parliamentary election to resolve the political crisis caused by last year's disastrous war with Azerbaijan. Opinion polls put the governing party led by Nikol Pashinyan neck and neck with that of the former president Robert Kocharian. Armenia lost significant territory and about 4,000 soldiers in the six-week conflict over the region of Nagorno-Karabakh. The BBC's Grigor Artisnian is in Yerevan.
Prime Minister Pashinyan was really forced to call this election after not only the opposition but also senior military leaders and diplomats have openly challenged his government, resigned or protested his actions. And that all comes from Armenia's military defeat in the war with neighboring Azerbaijan last year. The country has been in crisis ever since.
Taiwan is due to receive 2.5 million doses of coronavirus vaccine today, donated by the United States. The island has a vaccine shortage and only 6% of its 23 million people have received a jab. Taiwan has accused China of interfering in its efforts to acquire vaccines from Western manufacturers. The number of Brazilians who've died with coronavirus has now passed 500,000. 2,300 people have died of COVID in the past day in Brazil. As Leonardo Russia explains, many people blame President Bolsonaro.
There were key failures from the government. From the beginning, President Jair Bolsonaro dismissed the threat posed by the virus. He joked about it and basically encouraged people to carry on working, said the economy had to function. He was against lockdowns. He never imposed a national lockdown. So state governors and mayors went to the Supreme Court and they managed to secure lockdowns, but also always under huge pressure from the government, financial pressure, and those lockdowns were very brief.
World news from the BBC. Hong Kong's pro-democracy newspaper Apple Daily has said it won't be able to continue normal operations for more than a couple of weeks after its assets were frozen. The offices of the paper were raided on Thursday and its top editors and executives were arrested under controversial new national security laws. Polling stations have opened in France for regional elections delayed because of the pandemic. They're being closely watched ahead of next year's presidential polls. It's the first time President Macron's party test regional elections, while the far-right National Rally Party led by Marine Le Pen has hopes of winning 2 regions, as Hugh Schofield in Paris explains.
If they can take one or other or both of those regions, then doubtless this will be trumpeted loud and clear in the months ahead by Marine Le Pen as a sign of things moving their way. The other thing to look out for will be, bluntly, the scale of Macron's defeat. No one expects his party to do well in these elections, and you can expect a lot of self-justification. The results come in from the Macron camp saying it doesn't matter. These are just regional elections, no more than that, and they have no bearing necessarily on how the presidential elections will go in less than a year's time.
Hugh Schofield in Paris. The athletes' village for the Olympic and Paralympic Games in Tokyo has been unveiled a month before competition begins. They are enhanced measures to tackle the coronavirus as cases surge in Japan. Athletes and officials will be asked to take daily tests and wear face masks. And the final round of group matches begins today in the Euro 2020 Football Championships, with most qualification places yet to be decided. In the 2 remaining matches in Group A, Italy take on Wales and Switzerland play Turkey. That's the latest BBC World News.
Hello, welcome back. You're listening to Weekend from the BBC World Service. I'm Celia Hatton. Well, we're joined by two guests who are sharing their thoughts on the news and issues making headlines at the moment. Well, today they are Viola van Kramon. She's a German member of the European Parliament for the Greens. She's also a rapporteur to the Parliament on Belarus. She joins us from Emden in the northwest of Germany. And Ivan Krastev, he's a Bulgarian political scientist. He's the chairman of the Center for Liberal Strategies in Sofia and a permanent fellow at the Institute for Human Science in Vienna. We're going to be hearing more from them in just a few moments' time. But first, the United States said it will continue negotiations with Iran over its nuclear program following the election of the hardline cleric Ebrahim Raisi as the Iranian president. The nuclear deal with Iran, known as the JCPOA, got Iran to curb down its nuclear ambitions. It was reached in Vienna in July 2015. Multiple parties signed the deal, including China, France, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the U.S. Later, the U.S. President Donald Trump decided to withdraw the United States from the agreement, although that decision was reversed by Joe Biden. Currently, negotiations to sign a new deal are going on in Vienna. Dr. Abbas Milani is director of the Iranian Studies program at Stanford University in California. I asked, what will Tehran do next?
Mr. Khamenei, in spite of his rhetoric against the West, has recognized that unless they make a deal with the West, the end of the regime might well be on the horizon. So whoever would have become the president, they were on the path to making a peace with the West and making not a peace necessarily, but making the deal with the United States on the nuclear deal.
Dr. Abbas Milani. Well, Mr. Raisi has in the past expressed support for the agreement. The Joint Commission of the JCPOA will meet later today in Vienna. Let's speak now to Lawrence Norman, a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Briefly, do we know what the talks will be focusing on today?
Good morning. Yeah, they're simply going to wrap up the latest round of talks in Vienna. They've been there for the last 10 days or so, in the sixth round of talks since they got going in April, and they'll wrap that up and work out when they come back next and discuss a couple of issues. But we absolutely don't expect anything significant to be decided today.
Lawrence, you've been following the negotiations from the very start since 2013. Will the new president change anything?
Well, I think you guys put it very nicely in your intro to this. Raisi has said that he is supportive of the nuclear deal and wants to return to it. Now, there is a certain degree of caution among the Western diplomats, particularly U.S. officials. They don't know how he will impact the talks precisely. They don't know if he will come in and have demands that Iran didn't have previously, or he'll be unhappy with some of the things that they've already worked out in the talks. But I think the bottom line is, first of all, Raisi is not taking office until later in the summer, so that gives some time for the current Rouhani government to wrap up the talks. And secondly, because he's been publicly in favor of it, because it seems like there is a consensus among the Iranian leadership to revive the 2015 deal, I think there is confidence that that there will be a full outcome to the current talks, and the deal will be revived at some point in the next 2-3 months.
So what's your gut feeling if talks are expected to wrap up? Do you think we're going to wrap up with a deal?
Well, they definitely won't wrap up today with a deal. But
in the
next few months. My understanding is they'll come back at the beginning of July. I mean, the basic view of many people watching the talks and some of the people involved was that the Iranians may have been waiting to give some of the bigger concessions until the presidential election was over, so that the country's leadership, the real power behind the scene, Supreme Leader Khamenei, knows that he'll have a hardliner in the presidency and knows that there is political space to make some concessions to get the deal wrapped up. Under the Rouhani government, you blame the Rouhani government for the concessions, and then the sanctions get lifted when Raisi takes office. I think there is every reason to believe that is possible, but ultimately we'll only know when those talks resume in July whether anything has changed. I would be surprised if we get to the end of the summer without a deal, but this is the US and Iran. It's an unpredictable relationship, and I wouldn't offer any guarantees ever in talks between those two.
Okay, Lawrence, thank you very much. Lawrence Norman, reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Let's turn our attention to France now. Next year, French politics is expected to heat. The French President Emmanuel Macron will be facing down the far-right leader Marine Le Pen in national polls. And for a taster of what we might expect then, let's take a look at what's happening in France today. French voters go to the polls on Sunday for the first round of regional and departmental elections. Less than a year before France's 2022 presidential vote, this pandemic-delayed rendezvous is a potential bellwether for that contest. Some contend keen to use this election to create a springboard for higher office. Well, for more on this, let's turn to Sarah Belwazan, a political reporter at the French newspaper Le Monde. Sarah, which areas are up for election, and what's the wider significance of the vote?
We have 13 regions in France that divide the country, and this is where we vote. We will vote for the president of these regions. The thing is, it is, of course, important on its own because they decide a lot of things on the everyday lives of people. But it is also very important for France because it's the last election before the presidential race. And some of the candidates that we have here may want to run for president against Macron in 2022 for the Conservative Party, for instance, in the north of France with Xavier Bertrand, in Île-de-France with Valérie Pécresse, just to say two of these names. The other thing that is at stake here is that we have Marine Le Pen, who is the leader of the far-right party, that wants to show what she can do, what she is able to do right now, that things have shifted her way. So she may, not herself of course, but her candidates, may win at least two regions, or it is more likely in one of these two, but it will be a very important signal if she does so.
How is the far right shaping the race? Are they shaping the kinds of things that are being spoken about on the agenda?
Yes, absolutely. France has known a few crimes recently, and people were very, very upset about that. And we've been talking. All the parties actually have been talking about security, crimes, and of course immigration. So she has been totally shaping the debate. Although these matters are absolutely not important in this particular race, because the presidents of the region don't have the power of the security. But they have all of them have been racing in this regional contest about these matters.
It sounds like a very dynamic race, but what are we looking at in terms of the turnout? Are voters excited about this?
Absolutely not. I can tell you. We have to look at the situation from the pandemic perspective. It has been lasting for 18 months. Of course, people have voted before we had our municipal elections, but now the pandemic is slowing down. A lot of restrictions have been lifted. People are going out, meeting their families. People have gotten first shots, maybe the second shots of COVID vaccine. So they're really looking forward to holidays more than politics. So we are expecting quite a low turnout, which could be a good thing for Marine Le Pen, because her electors, they go to vote.
Okay, let's bring our guests in here at this point. Viola von Kramon, as you hear about what's going on in France, what are your reflections in terms of your country, Germany? Are there any parallels there?
Well, at least the last point about voters' mobilization from the far right, it's very similar. In general, I would say we have a different electoral system in Germany. It is much easier for us as Greens, even without unification with other opposition parties, to have a solid result. So we do not have the winner takes it all system, and we have also a different federal system, which makes it much easier for us to really make a contribution to the system or to the political landscape. And so that's a complete, I would say, a different setting. But in terms of splitting the society, expecting of voters, and also some of the narratives, not so far the anti-immigration, but also how we're going to build up the country after the COVID, how we're going to really implement this European Green Deal, and also this countering too much of EU sovereignty, and also how would be Germany perceived in the world, so security issues, and I think some topics are pretty much similar to what we hear from France, but I would say as a Green Party, we are much more advanced and much more mature than our colleagues, for example, in France, considering the different electoral system.
Ivan Krastev, watching all of this from Vienna, what trends do you see in terms of where politically France is going and where Germany is heading?
Of course, probably Vienna is not the best place to observe what is happening in the two biggest EU member states. But if you go on the latest opinion polls, you're going to see that France and Germany were the two societies in which dissatisfaction with the European Union has rose most in the next 3 months. Part of it very much connected to the slow vaccination process. And at the same time, there is a feeling that basically they go in a different way. Particularly with the rise of the Greens in Germany, you have the feeling that as a whole, Germany is moving on the left on certain type of climate policies. There is a kind of a new consensus on certain type of other political issues, while law and order is totally predominant in the French debate. It's true for the far right, it's true for the President Macron. So at this point, the feeling is that France is going to move much more on the right, regardless of the results of the elections. So this is going to be a challenge for the European Union. And honestly speaking, this region is probably make it clear that Le Pen is possibly electable. If before the idea was that she can do fine, but she can never be elected, that this is a classical protest vote, that they have a threshold that they can never cross, I don't believe that even in France, many people are sharing this view anymore. And how European Union is going to function if the possibility and if Le Pen is going to be elected, this is a big question for the EU. At the same time, I do believe that President Macron is slightly in a better position than many people expect, because if you compare polling data to his predecessors, not only Mr. Hollande, but even Sarkozy and Chirac, you're going to see that he's doing bad, but he's doing better than them.
Briefly, Sarah, let's just turn back to you. 13 serving cabinet ministers are standing for election today. Just briefly, what are we expecting there?
They're not going to win. Macron, who has exactly like has been said just a few seconds ago, it's very interesting what's happening to him. Macron has very high approval rates, higher than Hollande and higher than Sarkozy. He is at 48% approval rates, which is quite high. But and he might, of course, Marine Le Pen might be elected. This is people are getting scared about it right now here. But he also may win for a second term. But on the other hand, all the ministers he sent on the field are going to lose. Except maybe one, Marc Fesneau in a region called Centre-Val de Loire. But they are not sent to win, actually, because La République En Marche, Macron's party, knows what they can do on the polls. They know they won't win. They know they can maybe be an inconvenience for the candidates from other parties that could race in 2022.
Okay, well, a lot to watch coming up in French politics. Thank you to Sarah Belwazan, political reporter at the French newspaper Le Monde. You're listening to Weekend on the BBC World Service. Well, big weddings in England are finally back on from the 21st of June with no limit on the number of guests. The collective sigh of relief for many couples waiting to wed with family and friends. But there's a hitch, if you'll excuse the pun. Due to COVID, dancing and singing remain prohibited. So, is a wedding still a wedding without dancing? And just how important is dancing at key life events and cultures across the world? Baroness Deborah Bull is a dancer and a former creative director of the Royal Opera House in London. She's now vice principal at King's College London, and she joins me now. Baroness Bull, you can have unlimited guests, but dancing is off limits at weddings. How important is a good dance at a wedding? Is it really a celebration without element?
Well, good morning, and yes, you've hit upon a real point of tension here, actually. I mean, particularly as we are seeing in the moment. I don't know if people are following the football around in the Euro Championships. We're seeing such massive crowds of people dancing together. It does seem odd it's not allowed at a wedding. Dancing really does have this key purpose in our lives, in that it is a moment of social cohesion when you can see several generations of the same family actually dancing together. And although that's something in our histories, we would have done that. We don't do that so much these days. So weddings really have this particular moment when we all do the same thing. We collectively move together. We release the endorphins together, and we get a kind of social high, which really cements the social bonds.
Now, you've had top-flight professional training. I read that you started dance classes at a very young age. But even if someone hasn't ever had a dance class in their life, does dancing still have the same positive effects on their well-being?
Oh, it absolutely does, because I mean, it's not really, in these instances, it's not the technical expertise. It is the act of moving. So it's the act of raising your heart rate, which gives the kind of the feeling. But it's also the act of doing that with other people. And if you look at the dances people perform at weddings, congas and the kind of line dancers that they go through phases and fads of line dancers, but typically they're very simple. You know, it's one foot in front of the other, step, 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 kick, step, 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 kick, or whatever it is. And pretty much everybody can do that. So it is the act of mirroring your body with somebody else's, which gives this particular sense of recognition in the brain. I see you do a movement, I feel that movement in my body because of the way the neurons fire in my brain. So it is this collective sense. And no, you don't need the technical skill to do it.
And just briefly, when we're on the other side of this pandemic, do you feel like there's going to be sort of a resurgence of interest in just getting out onto a dance floor or enrolling in a dance class?
That's a really good point. I mean, I think we've seen that there's been an uptake in people wanting to do exercise, and that may spill over into a dance class because of course, dance. Dance is an art form, and there are many things we could talk about in that respect. But also, dance is a form of exercise, and typically, it can be a bit more fun than other sorts of exercise, because you have the music, you have the collective, you typical work in a class, and you're learning new skills. You're not just running or cycling. So I think we might see people want to pick up on that and do it together. But I think we're definitely going to want to see people want to come out as a collective mass and to basically release a lot of the tension and also raise the endorphins. been a lot over the last couple of years that's been endorphin raising. You know, you get the endorphins when you do this intense exercise and when you do it in a pleasurable social environment.
Okay, thank you very much. That was Baroness Deborah Bull. She's the Vice Principal at King's College London. Now, we just have a brief moment left in the program, but Viola von Krammen, what do you think? Are you yearning to get it back out onto a dance floor in any way?
Well, surely I'm not a big dancer myself, but dancing is a crucial part of cultural life everywhere. I think that's just fantastic. And remembering the days, be it in Scotland or Ukraine or Russia, when you visit the rural areas, the countryside, and something is going on, and you're just into it, and you do not need languages, and you're just part of the community, of the society there, and that part during the Corona crisis was surely missing, and it would be great if we could get it back. And as Deborah said, I mean, we have the Euro 2020 now going on, but dancing is still prohibited.
Yvonne, let's turn over to you. What do you think at the end of the pandemic? Do you sense the urge for just to get onto a dance floor and to move in that way?
No, listen, if I go, I'm not sure that the floor is going to enjoy it. But in general, I do believe people need a collective joy. Don't forget, one of the major shocks when the pandemic started was that we cannot have a big funerals. So this is certain things that was the shock. And now in order to see that this has ended, you need this collective joy. And of course, dancing together is very important. Because when people are not dancing, governments are dancing, and normally governments are dancing red lines that people are putting for them.
Okay. Well, thank you very much to my two guests. We were joined today by Viola von Krammen, a German MEP,